pop in where they can. But my name is Nancy Ostin. I'm the director of IEEE at Kappa Nu. I have the greatest job ever, right? I get to work with the most amazing students and young alumni, young people, experienced engineers, really the most brilliant people in the world. So it's really my pleasure to welcome you to Pathways, to our pivot, our session on pivoting, navigating significant transitions in your life. And we always say life happens. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today with some people that are going through a lot of those changes themselves. And they're going to share what's going on with them and how they've dealt with it. And I get to introduce to you Amy Jones, who's a member of our Board of Governors. Congratulations for joining the board this year, Amy. And she chairs our Young Alumni Committee. And take it away, Amy.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm so excited to learn from our panelists, and I know that you are too. So I'm going to start off by asking our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and give us an overview of their background. So Julia, would you kick us off, please?
Sure. My name is Julia Kırkıcı. I'm a university professor. I'm also the department chair of electrical and computer engineering at the University of South Alabama. This is a short version, and longer version will come through as you guys ask questions. But but I'm also the sitting on the board as a member, governor at large.
Thank you, Julia. Katie, could I ask you to go next?
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Katie Brinker. Currently, I work as a senior non-destructive evaluation engineer at Pratt & Whitney out in Connecticut. I just finished up my PhD back in December, so I've been going through a lot of these transitions of finding my first job after grad school and moving across the country, settling into a new job, all those kind of things. So it's all very fresh for me, and I'm excited to talk about it all with you all today.
Thank you, Katie. Vic, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vikrant. I'm currently a systems engineer for pose and localization at Waymo, the company that started as Google's self-driving car project. Before this, maybe about a couple of years back, I finished my PhD. And before that, I actually used to be a subsea engineer in the deep water of oil and gas industry. So I've made quite a few dramatic changes, and happy to discuss them as we go along.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we all know that there are very many kinds of changes that happen either based on a decision that we make or just suddenly within our life and within our career. I'm going to start by asking our panel, what is the biggest transition that you have experienced within your career? And was it an anticipated transition or was it sudden? So Julia, would you start, please?
In my career, I have had several transitions, actually, even having the same job through the promotion and through changing projects, and every time something changes in your routine is a transition. I think for me, most dramatic or most important change is leaving a university after 25 years, being a university professor, to become an administrator at in a completely different university. It's both has the rewards and also the challenges associated with the change, and I think that was the most important change for me. But as a student, you guys will have similar experiences throughout your career.
Absolutely. Vic, what about you? What's been your biggest transition so far?
I guess I'd like to point out a couple. One which was sort of voluntary and one sort of forced upon me. I guess the one was when I went to grad school right after undergrad with the hope of getting a PhD, and I soon realized that with the situation I was in, as in I was sort of mentally feeling burned out of having been working hard for 4 years already. I realized that PhD was not going to happen at the time. So I think I would say that was a voluntary transition. I decided not to do a PhD and just finish up with the master's. And that transition had its own costs, which was that the master's was not the most efficient because I was trying to go through PhD routes. I was doing, I I was doing courses that were required for qualifiers instead of just getting the most out of the masters. So a late decision had its cost there. And then in 2015, when I was working in the deepwater oil and gas business, when the price of oil tanked, I found myself out of job, being laid off. And at this time, the whole industry changed around me, and it was pretty hard to. I had to make the decision whether to try and continue in there or do something different. So I would say those are the two big ones for me.
Got a wide spectrum there. Katie, what about you?
Yeah, so I think for me, kind of one of the biggest transitions or, kind of pivots that I have made was the job that I went into grad school thinking I would have versus the job I actually ended up with. So, when I started my PhD, I had the NASA Space Technology Research Fellowship, and part of that is you get to do research at a NASA center for 10 weeks a year. And doing that kind of really made me want to be a researcher at the branch that I worked at NASA. And so I kind of put my eggs in all in that basket. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do these volunteer positions. I'm going to get this internship. I'm going to try to set myself up for this job as much as possible. But, then kind of I was going to graduate or defend my dissertation this past November. So over the summer, I was kind of talking to my mentors and the different people I knew in the branch, and they weren't going to have a slot. So it was not that I wasn't qualified or wasn't good enough for it. It was just the timing wasn't going to work out. So kind of the job that I had set myself up for wasn't going to exist. Or it was kind of like, well, if maybe somebody retires, we might have a slot in your area, maybe, but it might be in a different area. And I was like, well, I can't bank on somebody maybe retiring and there maybe being a slot. So I had to kind of pivot and start looking for other positions that I would be interested in. And that's kind of what led me to the job that I have now. So still in non-district evaluation, still getting to do some research. And there's perks for not working for the federal government and working for a private company instead. So, overall it worked out, but that was definitely a big transition and kind of pivotal point was, the reason I went to grad school ended up just not working out.
That sounds very disconcerting. Similarly with what Vic talked about and a little bit with what Julia talked about, when you make a plan, as engineers, we all really love making a plan, but then when that plan ends, it can be really disorienting. So Julia, I'd like to dive in a little bit because I know that you have another commitment here, so you'll have to step out. I'd like to ask you, your decision to transition employers to leave a place where you had a very strong foundation. How did you decide that change was necessary? And how did you frame that transition in your mind to prepare for it?
That's a very, very good question. Really, in my case, different than Katie's case, the way that I pivoted is that at the time, I really had no idea that I wanted to go to the path of academic administration. It just happened that I was really not happy with what I was doing, and it was becoming too routine. And I had students, great students, coming and going and producing and writing papers, and I was doing research, getting research grants and continuously, and so it became a very routine, very less rewarding experience. So I decided to change my research area a little bit and pivot towards more exciting new types of research field. And I took a sabbatical and I went to Air Force Research Laboratories and to do research. And I did. And I spent a year simultaneously while I was there. And I was also awarded to be working with the University of President on a Presidential Administrative Fellowship. That's an award from the university, and I did that for a year. And at the end of that experience, and I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing after the fellowship was over. And expectation was I was going to go back to the lab and work, but the university professor, the university president at the time, sort of my mentor, and he encouraged me to move forward with the academic administration. So that was really the decision that I made. But throughout my career, I think there are things that you plan, there are things that you don't plan. I came to this country as an international graduate student, like many of you on the call, most likely. And that was also a decision that after finishing my graduation with my PhD, and I was going to go back to Turkey, the circumstances and things that I didn't plan outside my control opened an opportunity to have a postdoctoral research position here in the United States, and I jumped on it. So I think the short answer is you can plan to pivot your life, and sometimes the life pivots you to the direction that you never even think about it. And look at all these opportunities and see the opportunity see the challenge as an opportunity for you to excel, as well as to be happy with what you do. If you're not happy with what you do, you will not be productive. You're not going to be help to anybody, and you're not going to give back to the society, and you're not going to be a valued citizen of the community. So I think the most important thing is to look for opportunities when you're pivoting from one position to another, is to be able to see if this is going to make me happy.
That's wonderful advice, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
And I also want to take that advice and transition to a question for Vic. So Vic, you mentioned that you experienced a layoff, and that is a really unexpected transition and can be a very difficult one. Can you talk a little bit about how you framed that transition in your mind and moved from something that was difficult into the position of success that you have now?
Yeah. So I guess let me back up a little bit before the layoff. So when I graduated with my master's, which was 8 years before the layoff happened, I really wanted to work on robotics. And at the time, robotics was very new. You couldn't really, as an international student, I couldn't really do any robotics outside of oil and gas, which was one of the few options where I could get involved in deep water robotics. And that's how I ended up in oil and gas in the first place. And over time, I transitioned from just doing robotics to more core oil and gas stuff. So when this happened, it was an opportunity to go back and think about what I wanted to really do. So that was a sort of blessing in disguise in a way for me. But in the meantime, the whole robotics industry had moved forward. Like none of the ideas I had looked at 8 years back mattered, and I had not done any coding, for example, for 8 years. So I had to make a decision on what would be the optimal way to get back into it. And for me at the time, it was a PhD, and that's how I sort of made the decision to go back to school.
That makes a lot of sense. As somebody who also experienced a layoff and ended up in a position where I'm much happier now than I was before, it's extremely challenging, but it is amazing how that opportunity to reflect and maybe restart a little bit can be, as you said, a blessing in disguise.
Absolutely, yeah. I would add one more thing where I guess the process that helped me make a decision was an honest assessment of the situation that was around me. With the price of oil crashing, I realized that subsea engineering was not going to be feasible. Like with all these other subsea engineers in the market, and the whole demand of the sector going down, it would like you try to be fighting for maybe one open position with 200 other people. So an honest assessment of the situations also helped make the decision in my case.
Very true. Trying not to focus on wishful thinking, but the best information that you have at your disposal at the time. The next question I want to ask is around mentors. So while Julia was talking about making her decision for a career transition, and Katie, while you were talking about what to do with your job situation, you both mentioned how important mentors were in that. Can you talk a little bit about the role of what a mentor can play in a career transition?
So,
do you want to go first?
no, okay, well, I can go first. Mentors are really, really important, and mentor-mentee relationship is really organic, and it has to grow organically, and you cannot say, oh, I want this person to be my mentor. It's a two-way street. For me, I call them, I have this person to mentor me in this area, I have other person to mentor me on the other area, etc., etc., etc. If I look around, I probably can right now name maybe 15 to 20 people as my mentors throughout my career. Of course, my career has been a long time, but I think don't don't say this person should be my mentor. If there is no two-way communications, it's not that productive. But it is important to have someone to get your ideas across and bounce those ideas back and forth to make the best decision for you. I think that's the most important thing, to make the best decision for you, and discussing it with someone else. And that's probably your friend, your mom, your dad, your brother, siblings, or your boss, your junior student. They can also be your mentors because they are going to be able to tell you things that you don't really know about yourself. And for example, my students used to tell me how they would like to be treated. And I really appreciated that. That's really, really important. So just don't think that your mentors should be someone experienced, yes, but also someone who can tell you what is really more important, that you will be more effective in doing your job and being happy and continuing your career the way that you want it to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julia. Katie, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Julia was saying. And I think too, when you come up against kind of these pivots that you weren't planning for, it's easy to get panicky and kind of be like, oh my God, I just need something. Like I need, I'll pick whatever comes up first because I just need something else and to have a plan again. So I think for me, kind of some of my main mentors were my graduate advisor and also a research collaborator from grad school. And, as I was looking at different job options, my advisor was very honest with me and was like, Katie, you would hate that job. That's not you writing proposals or doing this. You're a scientist, you're an engineer. You'll be much happier if you wait it out and wait for the right opportunity to come rather than just picking the first opportunity. So I think having somebody who can also be really honest with you and knows you well enough to know, hey, that's not right for you, you're just kind of trying to make an impulse decision versus you're really thinking this through, that can be very helpful.
Absolutely. How many times in our career is it valuable to have somebody who can be just a really logical sounding board when we're in the midst of very difficult transitions? So thinking a little bit more about that, especially when the transition is sudden, having that sounding board is incredibly valuable. But when I look at the polls that are posted, we have a lot of people in this session today who are looking at graduation or moving or changing industries. So transitions that are a little bit more planned. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how we can plan for a transition and make it as successful as possible. So Vic, if you don't mind, I'd like for you to start with that question.
I guess there are a couple of things that come to mind. First is, instead of trying to set your final goal in sort of a stone, it's more like think of it more like a PID control set point where your outcome is going to try to get there, but may not always get there. So that leaves you flexibility of adjusting your plans as things change a little bit. So I would say that's the first one, and then the second one is even before you have the action, you're forced to make a decision or you come to the decision point. Maybe it's a good practice to regularly reflect on your big picture plans. Did you want to be doing a certain thing in your career? Taking time out maybe once a year, just thinking about things like And maybe playing some scenarios like, oh, if I get a better job offer, would I take it at this time? Or if I wanted to change industries, would I take it? Given my team, am I the best person for this job? Or given other things I see around me, could I be doing someone else's job much better? So I guess all these reflections can help when the time comes.
Vic, I really love that point about thinking through scenarios. I was reminded while you were talking of Captain Sully, who landed that airplane on the Hudson. When he did that, he said, well, I've dealt with disasters like this in my head over and over again, so I felt really prepared. So I think that's really, hopefully on a smaller scale than an airplane crash. But thinking through those scenarios, those worst case scenarios, or even a better case scenario, what would you do, can really help us to mentally prepare for those kinds of transitions. Katie, what about you? How do you think that you plan for a planned transition? What kind of preparation do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be so many factors that come with it too, especially if you're moving locations or things like that. One big thing for me when trying to figure out where to go for my current job was, will my partner also be able to get a job that he likes in this area? And so, oftentimes with these transitions, it's not just about you. It's about, your immediate support system, your family, all of that as well. And then I think from a very practical point of view, there's also the financial aspect of it. If you're planning to go from a full-time engineering job back to grad school or something like that full-time, planning that out financially. Do you have an emergency fund? Do you have enough saved up to make that transition and not have to drastically change your lifestyle too much? There's all these other kind of factors in between besides just whether or not it's what you want to do at the time or not. And maybe making a multi-year plan and kind of baby stepping your way to that new point rather than just full jump.
Absolutely. I'm going to pause here and mention that we are taking questions for our panelists here in the chat. So if anybody has any, please type them up and we will be happy to ask them. So how has your attitude towards planning for transitions or making these significant decisions changed over time? This seems like the kind of thing that we do more as we go throughout our career. So Vic, maybe I'll start with you. Do you feel like how you handle a transition or a major decision now is different than you did when you were just starting out?
I think the biggest change is definitely when I was starting out, I was single. It had to be more about, where I wanted to live. Would there be enough things to do in the weekends? So, decisions were based on personal choice and personal taste. But now, as a family, we had to make very different choices and decisions. Like, as the four of us, like my wife, two kids. If we were to move, is the school system going to be good enough? Is the again, my partner, is she going to be able to have a fulfilling life in this location? So I think that's probably the biggest change now.
What about you, Katie? I know that you're relatively new within your industry career, but you've also made transitions. Like I know you moved graduate schools partway through your PhD.
Mm-hmm.
Has your attitude towards decisions changed?
I don't know if it's changed very much. I by nature am an extreme planner, so don't react very well to the unexpected, and honestly, I still don't. Maybe that'll come more with age and time, that I'll kind of mellow out and I'll be more receptive to the unexpected. But I think it's changing graduate schools. That was another major transition, like you mentioned. And that was very interesting too, because I had kind of shopped around for PhD programs. I had offers from a few different places, and I had decided to stay at Missouri S&T, and then got a new apartment. And then a week later, my advisor was like, we're moving to Iowa. Do you want to come? So, I think one thing that always helps is just thinking about what kind of new opportunities and what are going to be the benefits that you have from the change. So by going up to Iowa State, I had access to more classes in different subject areas, more resources, a bigger lab, more collaborations with other professors in my area. So there was a lot of positives to kind of offset the negative of like more snow and cold. So, you take the good with the bad and try to focus on the good and, kind of convince yourself that like, okay, it's all going to be okay in the end. And oftentimes it is.
Yeah, as another person who transitions from Missouri into Iowa, I can echo that there are some good offsets there.
Amy,
Thank you for jumping in.
Yeah. So I guess on the subject, I think all of us have been through a major sort of transition, and that was with COVID, right? And maybe a question for you guys is, how would you deal with it now? Like, because we've experienced it over multiple years, and probably the way we dealt with it in the beginning was different from later.
Excellent question. We'll look for some responses in the chat for that. It's especially interesting when you think about how COVID impacted all of us so strongly and yet so differently. So for example, there's a big difference between people with young children during COVID who are trying to manage potentially work and education in the home, people who were caring for maybe immunocompromised or at-risk people, versus college students who had their entire college experience kind of turned over, or high school students. So you're right, Vic, that was a huge period of transition for all of us. So we have a couple of questions from the chat. I'm gonna go ahead and ask these. So when things don't go the way you want, how do you not take things personally? And when should you take it personally to see how you could be contributing to the lack of results? So how much is our fault and how much is somebody else's fault?
I mean, I think it's so dependent on the situation too. It's hard to kind of generalize, but I think to some extent it's okay to feel your feelings and like it's okay to grieve the opportunity that you missed out on, or take the time to feel what you feel, because your feelings are valid, and it's okay to feel negative or bad about a situation that you didn't expect. But then from there, it's how do you regroup and kind of move forward from that. I think if you never process it and never feel your feelings, then it's harder to move forward because you didn't kind of explore, okay, why did that make me feel bad? What about this situation maybe made this happen? Was it all factors out of my control? How could I maybe improve myself to make sure this doesn't happen again? Or, was it just completely not my fault, weird, bad luck, things happen, but if you don't explore the situation and how you feel about it, it's harder to move on from it, I think.
I think that's such a great point, Katie, about processing, even when it's uncomfortable information, and giving yourself the space and time to really do the learning from those kinds of things. Dick, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll talk more specifically about, for example, the layoff. Like the first thing that comes to your mind is like, okay, maybe I'm not good enough, or there was a reason why I was selected, and that might be valid. Maybe it needs a little bit of self-reflection, but that doesn't necessarily say that you're no good. What it means is that maybe you're not a good fit. Maybe you're not a good fit for the team or the company or the role, or whatever it might be. An honest assessment of that is worthwhile to do quickly. But at the end of the day, you can make some changes that might help. But you are you, so you need to dig in, and maybe find the more appropriate combination that would work better for you. So I guess trying to play the blame game doesn't take you anywhere far. So at some point you need to own it, know who you are, and then get on with it. Because these are things that you cannot really control. So once you realize that this has happened, it's done. It's not that you can change it anymore. So once that realization sinks in, I think it makes things easier. It takes a while, and a lot of people equate it to the 12-step process of the grief or something like that. But at the end of the day, you need to come to terms, and then I think things get easier.
I agree with that really strongly. I feel like one of the things that I learned from my layoff was a little bit of self-knowledge. The things that I thought that I was really going to enjoy in my career turned out to be not the things that I really do enjoy in my career. So I think your point about something being not a good fit can absolutely be true. All right, the next question from the chat. Have you ever had an experience where you're faced with signs that it might be best for you to make a transition to something new? How do you handle that? Not an unplanned transition like a layoff or a planned one like graduation, but maybe something like changing jobs or changing industries, a change that you have to decide to initiate.
I mean, I think one thing to think about is, if you're really unhappy in your current role or what you're doing and it's not serving you, it's not getting you to where you want to be, you can prioritize yourself and move yourself into a situation that will feel a lot better for you. My partner, he hated his last job. It was an awful work environment. It was manufacturing, so you get calls at like 3 a.m. that, oh, something is broken. How do we fix this? And it just made him miserable. And so like moving jobs was a very good decision just for prioritizing his own mental health and happiness and like contentment with day to day. You spend a decent amount of time at work every day, so doing something that you don't hate and doesn't make you miserable is a pretty nice thing to have and something worth prioritizing, in my opinion. But you can start with just exploring your options, doing a search on LinkedIn or other job sites, trying to do some self-exploration and figure out, okay, what do I like about my current role? What do I not like? What am I looking for? What's important to me? Can you make a decision matrix and lay out all the different things like location, your team size, what kind of day-to-day work do you do, opportunities for advancement, all those different things, and find companies, maybe do some informational interviews with people that at different companies or people you find on LinkedIn. Maybe somebody works in a role that you think sounds really cool and you can just ask them like, hey, could I do an informational interview with you for 20 minutes and just kind of talk to you about your role? I'm really interested in learning more. I think gathering information and figuring out, okay, here's what I want to go and here's where I want to direct myself can give you an idea of how do you break down that big goal into smaller, manageable steps. It's like taking a big deadline and making milestones in between.
Absolutely. When you're initiating the transition on your own, you have the luxury of time.
Yeah.
What do you think, Vic? How do we push ourselves into change?
Yeah, so I'll go with the more radical response instead of trying to overthink it or plan it too much. I would say if you're on the fence, say between 40 to 60% of making that change, I would say go for it. If you put big decisions in life, like finding your partner, compared to that, this is easy to back out of. So if you don't like the new position, you could go back. Maybe if you don't like a new job, you can find another one. So I think go for it is what I would say. And there's maybe some scientific evidence to back it up. If you hear about Stephen Dubner's Freakonomics podcast, they did an experiment where they actually had a questionnaire on a website where they made people come up or explain their difficult decision, and they would just tell people, yes, do the change. And then after a few months, they looked at what portion of people were happier about that decision, and most of them were. So I would say that would be another way to go for it.
I really love these answers because we have Katie with the classic engineer of like make a spreadsheet. And then we have Vic really encouraging us to go for it, but still giving us like a numerical threshold for when we feel like we should go for it. Y'all are my people. This is great. So kind of taking another audience question and kind of leading into that. You both kind of mentioned that there was a point where you have to prioritize your own mental health and kind of go with your gut. But how do you go about announcing decisions or making decisions when you know that there's somebody that you care about that's not going to like it. So an advisor, a partner, a peer, even when it's the best decision for yourself, how do you handle that when making a decision? I'm going to say, Vic, do you mind going first with this one?
I mean, there's no easy way. I think you need to, at the end of the day, pull the Band-Aid, but be as nice as possible about it. Being clear about your reasons helps the other person assimilate the information, I guess. But at the end of the day, you have to put yourself first and be honest to yourself, and then that comes across. And hopefully you can convey it to the other person. It was not because of their fault or their decision. It was something that you really needed to do for yourself. I've been lucky that I haven't had people disagreeing with most of the choices I've made, so that's been easier.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think you can tell them, I care about you, I value your opinion. However, this was the best decision for me because XYZ reasons, I hope you'll understand, and, at the end of the day too, you don't really owe them a full explanation. So, if they push back and are like, well, who's going to take care of my dog on the weekends? You'll be like, well, that's your dog, not mine. I'm sorry. Figure it out. Not my problem. There's ways to kind of say, done with this conversation, said what I need to say, let me know if you want to discuss this again in the future, or, I'll give you some space and we can talk again in a couple weeks and catch up. It's always difficult to have these conversations, but, you don't need to make yourself feel miserable or responsible for other people's reactions to your life choices that at the end of the day affect you the most.
And remember, we are recording this. You can always send this recording to somebody and tell them, hey, I know I'm triggering an unpleasant, unexpected change for you. Maybe if you watch this, Vic and Katie will give you some help in figuring out who's going to take care of your dog over the weekends. So we're a one-stop shop here. One more tactical question from the chat. What are your opinions of online PhD programs? I live in an area where there aren't a lot of programs in my field of study, but moving to another state is not really an option. So we'll ask specifically about the opinions on the online PhD programs, but also when you think about ideal decisions versus realistic decisions, how do you make a choice when you have limited options? So Vic, do you have experience with online PhD programs?
No, I do not have. I guess everyone's PhD program turned online for the last few COVID years. But to me, the most rewarding part of my PhD was working in the labs, was tinkering with hardware. It was being able to go out to Antarctica and use drones and do penguin surveys. So to me, at least in my field, a lot of it is about doing it hands-on. I guess in this case, maybe an intermediate path might be where you can sort of maybe spend, some short periods of time, few weeks at a time, doing things, at a lab, collecting the data, and then continuing your work remotely. So there might be options like that you can sort of find that are more amenable than a complete yes or no about doing it online completely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, it's hard to do research and kind of have research collaborations and gather data and do experiments and all that stuff when you're not going to a lab or a university and kind of seeing that on the day-to-day basis. It's not impossible. It really depends on the research field too. If your research is very computational focused, maybe it is possible to do a lot of it from home. That being said, it can be harder to kind of, you don't have as many of those impromptu discussions at the lab where you're sitting in your office and your lab mate is like, oh, hey, I was working on this thing and, you've worked on that before. What do you think of this idea? Or, you don't get as much of that collaboration. And it can be kind of hard to, establish relationships when you're always online and everybody else is in person. I think I had the benefit of, COVID hit after I'd been working with my lab group for a few years already. So I already had those kind of relationships and those collaborations and process and knew how to use the simulation tools. And I was pretty self-sufficient by that time, that working from home wasn't a big detriment to me. But I feel like it would have been a lot harder if that was my first semester in PhD and I didn't know any of these people and didn't know how to do any of these things. So I think it's really tough. I mean, online coursework for graduate school, online certificates, maybe there's some options there where, some of the skills you want to gain, you can gain through like a course-based master's program or a graduate certificate or something like that, that can kind of get you some of that. And that's a little bit more geared towards online kind of situation. But, it's tough. And like Amy was saying, it's that difference between the ideal situation and the practical situation and like, what can you do? Maybe there is some in between. Maybe there's a way to do, go in to the lab once a month, once every other month, or something like that, kind of have those touch points. Maybe there's something local to you where you could gather data or do your experiments or do your research. A lot of people do programs where, they're working at a national lab, but their university is in a different state. And so they can do their research at their job and go back and forth. It's, I think you can kind of customize your own journey, choose your own adventure to some extent, but you have to kind of figure that out and figure out what works with the parameters that you have.
Excellent. I think we're going to take one more question from the chat, and then we're going to go into our final wrap-ups. So last question, having a support system is clearly crucial. So how have groups like HKN help first? Oh, did that question come through?
Most of it. I mean, I read the question here. So how have groups like HKN helped you through your big transitions? Is that right? And was it aimed at me or Katie?
Let's go ahead and let you start, Vic, and then we'll transition over to Katie.
Okay. I guess I only heard about HKN very late in my graduate program. It was literally in the last semester when I heard about it. So I could not get as much out of it as most of you other folks can. But as I was making my decision in Boston, whether I should move to the Bay Area, for example, HKN helped me connect to people who were living here already. They were able to, talking to them, I could figure out what the practical differences would be in living in the Bay Area and people with kids, how things would work out. So I had a lot of help in the social questions and more practical things through the HKN network. So it has been a great help already.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple things. I think for one, just having a network of HKN people, I think after making the decision to transition, I got a lot of affirmation, like positive affirmation from HKN community, and that was good. It was people being excited for me for the new step, the next step, those kind of things. And it kind of helped to reaffirm my decision that like, okay, I'm not totally out there making a horrible decision that's going to ruin my life. Other people are like, oh, congratulations, cool, that's great, that's awesome, happy for you, those kind of things. So having that positive affirmation was very nice and very helpful. But I think the other thing with just kind of IEEE and HKN in general was that, when I was starting to look for jobs, or I would tell people, like back in May, like, oh, I'm going to be defending in November, they'd be like, hey, look at these jobs on my company website. And if you see something you like, let me know and I'll put you in touch, with somebody there. So it was just having those people kind of in my corner that could help me out and kind of advocate for me for different jobs and positions, or put me in contact with the right people. It was just having that support network and those people to kind of lift me up, affirm my decisions, but also provide like practical help along the way too.
I love that. All right, final question in the whole session. What is one takeaway around navigating significant transitions that you would like to share with our audience? And let's see, Katie, would you go first?
I think kind of the biggest thing, and we've been mentioning it throughout this session, is that transitions can be blessings in disguise a lot of times. You kind of land where you need to be in the end. And, part of that is the decisions and the very intentional choices that you make to get yourself there. And part of it can be luck and timing as well. But, in the end, you can end up in a really good place and happier and more fulfilled than you thought you would be when the transition started. So it's not always a bad thing. A lot of times it's a good thing.
I love the optimism. Vic, what about you? What do you want our audience to take away today?
I absolutely agree. Whether forced or not, everything works out in the end. In my case, even after the layoff, going back to the PhD program, I got to do things that I would have never imagined doing. I got great opportunities. I got to live in Boston, which my wife and kids loved. Eventually things worked out. But the thing that can help you is always, at all times, being honest with yourself, making honest assessments of your situation at all times. And then once you make a decision, go on with it. Don't try to rethink your own decision. In my case, it was once we made the decision, I'm going to go back to school. That's the day I stopped applying for jobs, and completely pushed through that decision and made it happen. So, being decisive once you make the decision.
I love that. Commit.
Yeah. I think one more thing that just came to mind is that, careers are long, and, if something doesn't work out now, you can always try again. There's more opportunities in the future. This isn't the rest of your life set in stone because you made one single decision. So, careers are long. There's a lot of opportunity, and you can end up somewhere new in a few years. Maybe your priorities change. Maybe what you want out of career changes, and you can get there too.
Wonderful. I can't think of a better space for us to end. Vic, Katie, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experiences with us. And everyone, I hope that you will remember that HKN is here in case you're going through a transition and need some support as well. So, Nancy, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I knew you guys would rock this session, so I had complete confidence in you, and I've known many of you through many of your transitions, and I've seen how graciously you've gone through them, and what you've experienced is valuable for others to learn from. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing a lot about that. So it's been a great session, as I knew it would be, and I wanted to thank you and appreciate you spending some time with us here at Pathways. The IEEE Young Alumni have a podcast called Career Conversations. Amy, I want to make sure I point out, so many of you work on that, this team right here. So if you want to check us out on YouTube and wherever podcasts are, it's called Career Conversations. And we sure would love to have you. Katie will probably quickly get that up there for me in the chat. So if you want to go and follow us on some other really interesting topics like this, please do, and share your thoughts with us. What else would you like to learn about? What else could we do podcasts or sessions on that would be helpful to you? But coming up next in our Pathways is our very last segment of the day of the whole conference, which is going to be another recruitment fair. So please join us over in the expo area. There are recruiters standing by looking to hire you. I know Amy works with John Deere. They've hired lots of HKN and IEEE students, and they really want to meet with you. And a bunch of other companies there. And again, we want to see you get jobs. We'd love to see you be successful. So go and meet with our recruiters. And like I said, one of our happiest things is if we can help you along the way with your here in university, in your transitions, in your jobs, and in your life. So thanks so much for joining us today. See you around Pathways.